Welcome to The How of Business with your host, Henry Lopez, the podcast that helps you start, run, and grow your small business. And now, here is your host.
Welcome to this episode of The How of Business. My guest today is Peter Mann. Peter, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Henry. Excited to be here.
Now, looking forward to this conversation. We're going to explore everything from Peter serving in the military to his later in life autism diagnosis, and then sharing his inspiring entrepreneurial journey through all of that, including founding and growing his latest venture, Oransi. Oransi is a maker of the best HEPA air purifiers. If you want to receive more information about the How of Business, including the show notes page for this episode and how you can continue supporting my show and receive exclusive content and discounts through a Patreon membership, just visit thehowofbusiness.com. I also encourage you to please subscribe to my show so you don't miss any episodes. So Peter Mann is the CEO and founder of Virginia-based Oransi, a leading air purification company known for its efficient, intuitive, and reliable products for consumers, schools, organizations, and businesses. He also is the chair of the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers Air Cleaner Council. And in 2021, Oransi merged with, how do you pronounce that?
Aviemore?
Aviemore, thank you. Aviemore Manufacturing, Aviemore Technologies, rather, and is now a motor technology company with a clean energy mission. Oransi's new manufacturing facility in Radford, Virginia, is making products in the USA with advanced motor technologies. Previously, Peter was the founder and CEO of the Austin, Texas-based Alen Corp, an air purification company he built, and after 7 years, he had a successful exit from that business. He went to college on a Navy ROTC scholarship and then served 4 years, including a tour in the Red Sea during the first Gulf War. He was a communications officer and then a gunnery officer on the USS McCandless. Peter is late diagnosed autistic and now advocates for autism awareness in the workplace. Peter lives in Blacksburg, Virginia. And so once again, Peter Mann, welcome to the show, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Henry.
So much to unpack there. You've done so much. You've experienced so many things, so many different twists and turns in your career. And so that's why it's so inspiring to chat about this. And I was excited to have you on the show. I think I'll just start with what I usually ask people who do go into the military. Why did you decide to go and serve in the military?
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I did okay in school, but I wasn't like the star student, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And my next door neighbor happened to be a retired brigadier general from the Air Force, and my grandfather was, I never met him, but he was in the Navy. And so I had, that kind of influence, and I wanted to go to a good college, but I didn't want to take on debt. And so, I looked into the ROTC scholarships and got one. And so, it was kind of a way to go to school without really knowing what I wanted to do, but having a job afterwards and going to a nice school without incurring, any kind of debt. That was kind of the driving force. I didn't know a lot about what I was getting into. But, traveling the world was kind of, an interest of mine. So, it all kind of just lined up. And, at that point in time, it made sense, to go that way.
What did you end up studying?
Statistics, really more of a math. I started in math and it got real theoretical in the higher levels. And so I wanted something a little it was more, you could apply. It was more practical, at least, in places where I could see I could use it. And so I shifted to statistics.
Got it. So then you served for 4 years. And then after the military, tell us about that career after the military.
Yeah. So I got out in the early 90s. And, it was pre 9/11. And so it was, it's kind of funny that if you served in the military and you got out in the 90s, nobody cared.
Interesting.
It's really changed since 9/11. It's like now it's like you get on a plane. It's like if there's a military person, you
Right.
like that didn't happen in the 90s. It was, and when I got out, it was like, well, what's your job experience? And, and, maybe it was a part my inability to communicate it, but it was also just, it was almost like I was starting from zero from like with a college degree when I got out and looking for a job. So it took me, 4 or 5 months to find a job. And I took almost a 50% pay cut just to get a job.
Wow.
Yeah. And
so back then, I mean, nobody really gave a lot of value to your work experience in the military. It was just dismissed, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. They're like, well, how does that relate to, working at this company? And it's, working at a tech company, and it was, it just didn't translate. It was kind of like, kind of like the lost 4 years in terms of like when I started off. But, in the end, I think it was good. And, I learned a lot about managing people and working with different types of people. And, I think that was really helpful in my career, but it really didn't come into play until a little bit later.
Mm-hmm. So just to stay on that point for a moment, as you, I'm sure, have hired and hire ex-military, what are a lot of employers missing about what you are able to bring forward from that experience, at least at a high level, that we should consider as employers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the position. A lot of people go into like operations roles. They're very process oriented, very rules follower kind of people. And there's lots of jobs to be done for that skill set. And so and it's also managing people. In the Navy, it's like you don't choose who's on your team. It's just it is what it is. It's not like they go through a hiring process. It's you have the people that you have, and you have to find ways of making the team functional. And so if you're any kind of supervisor or manager, those are really good skills that you get at a young age. Because I graduated from college, I was 21, and then I was managing people, most of who were older than me, and I was, having to deal with some resentment from people that are in their 30s or 40s, having some 21, 22-year-old kid, trying to manage them and figure it out. And it's also the, ability to figure things out is, I think really important in the workplace.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Peter, because we have talked about this before. You, like you said, you're given a group of people. You didn't get to choose them. Often you don't get to fire them either. So you have to learn how to get the most out of these individuals and make them work as a group. And it is what it is. You don't get to switch them out necessarily.
Yeah, you can't, and they can't quit either. It's like,
right.
It's like you're like, it's like a marriage, and you're kind of all connected and relying on each other. And it's figuring out how to work with different types of people.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was really interesting. And I did really well there because I, would listen and try and solve problems and, value everyone's opinion, which, wasn't necessarily the case for all the, other officers.
Right. When does the desire to start your own business, when does that come about?
Yeah. So, I worked for 2 Fortune 100 tech companies, Tech Data and Dell. And during, the 90s and the early 2000s, the computer industry was a really fun place to be. It was a lot of growth. Those were really large, fairly bureaucratic organizations when you're that size. And so I always had this desire for autonomy and doing something, but I had never taken a business class, and I didn't have the confidence, I think, to step out and do something on my own. And that was really the, early days of the internet. And so, previous to that, if you, worked in the 80s or earlier in the 90s, you just worked for a bigger company. There wasn't as many entrepreneurial opportunities as exist today, or, in the last 15, 20 years. And so, I just had this drive for, autonomy and getting away from some of these big companies, but I didn't know what to do or how to do it. And that kind of held me back. It was just, it was like, well, I have this salary. It's like a security blanket. And if I leave, am I going to really be able to stand on my own and make it work?
So why did you take this leap? What was it? Was there something that happened, or was it just what leads you to finally take this step? And I think it was in this e-commerce space with the air conditioners and air cleaners, correct?
Yeah. So I was working at Dell, and I was in a marketing role and kind of managed pricing strategy. I did led some development for Dell.com functionality on the, government side. And this was during the .com bubble burst. That was the push because we were every 2-3 weeks, we were doing another round of layoffs. And while I didn't see my job at being at risk, it was just the process of going through and laying off people and having terrible morale. It was like, this isn't fun. And I'd met this guy in Austin, and we, co-founded an e-commerce business. And so I would work at Dell from 8 to 5. And then from 7 to 11 p.m., I would work on this e-commerce business at night, and did that for, I don't know, 6-7 months, until it had legs, and I could see that this could be something, and then left Dell to go and do that full time.
Wow. Now, the fact that it was in the air purification, air cleaning, was that purposeful, or was that just happen to be what your friend was into? Or tell me about that. Was there a mission there from the beginning that was of interest to you?
Yeah. So, there was like two parts to the business. One is we were creating e-commerce sites selling niche categories, and so we sold tankless water heaters, portable air conditioners. Air purifiers was one of five or six categories that we sold. And I, had developed an interest in air purifiers because my son, when he was an infant, really struggled with asthma.
I see.
And that really left a mark in, him struggling to breathe. And so, when we had that business, we, started off reselling other people's products because it doesn't require cash up front to,
right.
You set up a website. We knew how to set up websites, because I was at Dell, and the guy I was my business partner, had his own e-commerce business selling a different kind of product. And so, those were the early days of the internet when it was 5 cents a click on Google. And, and I came from Dell where we were competing with HP, and then I moved into, tankless water heaters and air pure, and competing against mom and pop shops.
Right.
So it was like the timing was, pretty lucky. I felt pretty lucky, in that environment. And so, we kind of built it out, and then, a couple of years in, kind of created this Alen brand, which, I started, which was to really brand products that were, they were made overseas, and we were just putting our name on them and reselling them to have higher margins.
Interesting. And so how long did that business last? How long did you run that business?
Yeah, that was from about 2002 or 2003 into 2009.
Okay.
And then I sold my part of the business, and then used the cash to start Oransi.
Why did you decide to sell out of that business? If you can share there.
Yeah, when you have a 50-50 business relationship, and in many ways it's like a marriage, and I've talked to the business attorneys, and they're like, it's pretty common when you have a 50-50 business to eventually have a difference of opinion down the road as to where you want to put, you get to a point where like an investment for you is a cost to someone else. You have different visions for where you want this to go. And, I got, life's too short to, be at your own business and not like it. And so I, decided just to sell my part and start from scratch and build what I wanted to build.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. I know it's a touchy subject, but we talk about that all the time on this show. And I'm very much typically against 50-50 partnerships because of all the problems that can arise from them. But
Mm-hmm.
partnerships in general are a challenge. I prefer to work in partnerships, but you have to go into it with a lot of clear understanding. But thanks for sharing that. Okay, so when is it that you get the later in life diagnosis of autism?
Yeah, that was during COVID. That was just recent. No,
Interesting.
I mean,
So
like,
even more, this is after you've already started Oransi.
yeah, I was in my 50s.
Wow.
Yeah, so my wife was watching, I guess CBS Morning Show was profiling a woman that is autistic, and she was describing her traits, and she's like, "You need to see this." And so I watched it, and she talked about hyperfocus, pattern seeking, seeing details other people miss, kind of math type stuff. And I was like, "Whoa, that's me." So I went online and took a number of screening assessments, and the probably the best one they have is, it's kind of interesting. It's done by this guy Simon Baron-Cohen. He's a Cambridge professor. He does a lot of research into autism. He's related to Sacha Baron Cohen.
Is he really?
Yeah, I don't know if they're
seriously,
cousins.
that's hilarious.
Yeah, it's like, wow. Yeah, it's kind of crazy, but he has a 50 question test, and it's kind of asking you, it doesn't take long to take, but a typical person scores, I don't know, 16 to 18 out of 50, and autistic people tend to score above 30. And I the first one I scored a 43. I took a number of other ones, and I was like, every single one was like, yeah, it's you're in that range. And then I set off on a quest to, I kind of didn't want to be a poser, and just I didn't know a lot about it at that time. Now I recognize that if you identify as autistic, and if you do a screening test and it shows that you really don't need a formal diagnosis to be considered autistic. There's so much stigma. It's not like people are dying to be
right
in this group. I think David Byrne from the Talking Heads, I don't think he's been formally diagnosed, but he says he's autistic, and he's looked at the criteria and he goes, yep, that's me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but then I did go off and get a formal diagnosis, but even that wasn't easy. It's, what I found is it's really set up for children. And, a lot of the centers don't do adults. And I did find one that's, I think, affiliated with Virginia Tech nearby, but, I would have had to wait a year and a half to see anybody. And so I ended up just finding a woman that does it via telehealth. And, over some period of months, we went through the process and received the official diagnosis, which is kind of everything.
And when that happens, were you scared, shocked, relieved, a combination of everything? What was going through your head at that point? I can only imagine.
Yeah, it was a lot. Like, she said, "What are you thinking?" And that's what I said. It's like, it's a lot to process. It was a little bit overwhelming, but it was what I expected. I was to the point where, like, how am I not autistic? They're taking all these, I took 10 screening tests, and every single once, it was very high score. And
you had spent your whole life using those superpowers. Now it's this, I don't know, disease or diagnosis, this bad thing, perhaps. Is that fair, or what?
Yeah, I didn't really see it that way.
Good.
I just saw it's just a difference. It's kind of, I kind of see it as like being left-handed or right-handed. It's just your brain works in a different way. I don't think it's
compelling.
Yeah, I think, it's been stigmatized to where you're kind of taught to be like you're defective or deficient in some way. And I don't think that's the case at all. And I don't mean to minimize everyone who's autistic has struggles. And in my opinion, it's in large part just due to the environment and societal norms, the way they are, and inflexibility. We're kind of viewed as the inflexible people, but I think a lot of the disability that's autism is the inflexibility of society to expand the scope of what's considered normal, or normal behavior. And, I think so much could be done to help autistic people if, if there's more awareness and understanding. Autism is just a different way of thinking, perceiving, and socializing. And then on top of it, there can be co-occurring conditions that affect cognition or speech, ADHD, a number of other things. But, just autism in and of itself is really, it's around the routines and the sensory sensitivities and, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming that now in your work environment, and because you're in control to some degree as the owner, you've created a routine, a process, an environment that allows you to leverage those hyper-focused abilities as superpowers for yourself and then the work that you do. Is that fair?
Yeah. And I think that's part of the drive for autonomy so much is I think that's an autistic characteristic. It's like, having the need to do that and to more or less set my schedule. A lot of, what triggers a lot of autistic people is, lack of routine, and being able to control my calendar and control my day and put structure around it is, allows me to be my best self. But, when I only speak for myself. I know, when you look at autistic people as a community, there's just a wide range. They call it a spectrum, but it's a spectrum on multiple axes. And what someone could struggle with, someone else may not. And it could be to a different extent or different degree. And so, but, I started to, learn a lot about it and, talk to other autistic people. And then I really became, I need to step up and start talking about this because the unemployment rate is most autistic people are unemployed, and that should not be the case.
No.
I mean, most autistic people have average to above average intelligence. And
that's what I have
people
found.
are unemployed. And it's also, with my late diagnosis, I think if you're an adult, most people are late diagnosed because, I was in elementary school in the 70s. And at that time, 1 in 2,500 were diagnosed as being autistic. And then just a couple weeks ago, CDC came out with 1 in 36. And It's not like there's more autistic people out there. It's just we were never diagnosed.
No.
And so, and there's probably millions of autistic adults running around not realizing they're autistic.
This is Henry Lopez, briefly pausing this episode to invite you to join me for one of my next live online workshops. During these interactive workshops, I cover a specific topic that will help you with starting and growing your small business. Just visit thehowofbusiness.com to learn more and to register. If you need help creating an effective business plan, for example, to start your first small business, then my next business plan workshop may be just what you need. Or perhaps you need help completing your financial projections for your new business. Well, I have a workshop for that too. And if you're already operating your business, then you can probably benefit from learning how to better manage the cash in your business by attending my cash flow management online workshop. These are just a few of the workshops that I currently offer, and I keep these workshops to a small number of participants so that we have the time to answer all of your questions. Whether it's getting started with your first business or growing and exiting your existing small business, I can help you get there with one of my online workshops. To find out more and to register for a live online workshop, please visit thehowofbusiness.com. Take that next step today towards finally realizing your business ownership dreams. I look forward to having you join me for my next workshop. Sometimes we face the challenge of the perception of our team of how accessible we are and how willing we are, the open door policy and being accessible. Has that posed a challenge? And more curious, how have you managed that so that people still feel like you get your autonomy, but you still are accessible to them as their leader?
Yeah, I mean, we have a factory here in Virginia, and really just getting it off the ground. And then we've got I don't know, 10 or 15 people that work remotely across the country. And so we have a bit of a hybrid work environment. And so we use Slack to communicate, and anyone reaches out to anyone else. I get questions all the time and that I just answer directly, or I try and set up Zoom meetings for those folks to, ask questions, and just to be, transparent and open with communication. And so I think we've got a pretty good culture where, everyone's feels confident to speak up and, talk about whatever's going on. And for me, I just want things to be better and to work well. Because I know we're in a competitive environment, and, I need everyone to be their best. And so, there's no point in having like any issues festering or, and so that's kind of the mindset. And so, my calendar, we all can see each other's calendars and book appointments, and, we have regular, weekly meetings with different groups. And so I think, communication is really important, and, just being open to, talk to people and be a human being is, I don't know, like how else to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. So why did you decide to stay in this space, in the air purifier space?
Yeah. So, when I left the other business, they, had a number of different categories, and I really wanted to focus on indoor air quality and just create a brand around that. And so that's, and I saw an opportunity to do that, and that's what I did. I wasn't sure, the previous business, that was part of the conflict I had with my, business partner, was, he was looking at other categories and wanting to, in the early 2000s, it was interesting. There was, other companies creating multiple websites, and one of them turned into Wayfair, and we were watching those guys. And he wanted to build more of that type of a model, and I wanted to build more of a brand around air quality. And those are very different, like visions.
Very different,
you would say.
Yeah.
And so, I ended up just, obviously leaving to start this and do what I wanted to do.
So obviously I understand the backstory with your challenges your son had. And so you began to learn and understand the value of air quality and the issues that we have with it. But did you also feel like there was a gap in the market to do it well?
Yeah, and there was a gap that was created because I don't know if you remember, in the 90s, there was all the Sharper Image stores and catalogs and infomercials, and they had an air purifier, which was, I believe, the top seller in the marketplace.
I see.
And people loved it because it got rid of odors, and, I thought it was just amazing. And then Consumer Reports came out, I don't know, 2003, 2000, I can't remember when, early maybe 2003 to 2005, and gave it 3 black circles and said, "Do not buy."
Really?
Essentially. And it resulted in a big lawsuit, and Sharper Image lost because Consumer Reports had a test methodology and showed how they tested. And the reason why the product did so well with odors is because it was emitting ozone. And then the California Air Resources Board, which is kind of part of the California EPA, came up with regulations around ozone limits for air purifiers. And so I think, I assume there's a connection there.
Right.
Because, ozone is great for getting rid of odors, except it's a lung irritant, and it's considered indoor air pollution. And so it's like, to me, it's like, if I had if with an asthmatic son, it's like ozone is not good. And so I wanted to, so that they created this market, and then they just disappeared. And so I was like, there's an opening here to do a product and do it right.
How long did it take you you had already been making air purifiers at Alen or reselling others, right? So you knew a little bit about the space, but this was the first time that you were manufacturing your own, or what am I missing there?
Yeah. So, previously we were just branding products that factories in China were making. And so I went to, Hong Kong and China and visited with factories, and, and I kind of started off that way in terms of they've already built the product and I'm just getting it. And, they have these products available, and then it's just a matter of placing orders, and putting your name on it. And that was kind of how it got started. And, and then in, I'd say 2013, connected with a factory in Connecticut that, makes electric motors, and worked with them to develop some air purifiers that we, from designed ourselves and were made at that factory, and did pretty well with those. And, since then have been, doing our own designs, and doing all the marketing and selling and shipping direct. Is just, we've never done the actual manufacturing part. And what happened in COVID is the market just kind of blew up, since there was more demand than supply of air purifiers. And it, and it just, the sales really took off. And I had a colleague that, had an electric motor company. He built it up, retired, came up with this new idea for a, new way to make high-end electric motors. I invested in that business. And then we ended up merging in 2021. And, now we're in the process of reshoring our manufacturing and building new products with, our electric motor technology.
Amazing. And your model right now is strictly direct to consumer e-commerce on your website. Is that correct? Or am I missing something there?
Yeah. I mean, there's also a B2B element with schools buying, but that's really tapered off. It kind of spiked in 2020 and 2021, but they kind of seem to have moved on to buying other things. Or I kind of laugh. It's like they'd rather put money in a football stadium than indoor air quality.
No doubt.
But yeah, it is. And so the idea is we're starting to reshore this summer. And so essentially we're going to be taking, parts and components and making the motor, making the machine, and then shipping it direct to the end user, which is, consumer. So really taking all the steps out of the process.
Yeah. And so that's the way you see yourself for the foreseeable future. You don't see yourself getting shelf space on a retailer's location. You'll stick to direct to consumer. And why is that? Why do you prefer that model at this point, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, it's control. I mean, it depends on the terms. I think when we're selling direct to the customer and shipping direct to them, it's the most efficient way to do it. We can keep our prices low. Our focus is on, higher performance, lower price, even higher performance, lower price than the Chinese imports. And so we need to be efficient in how we do things. It could be that we have the product in retail stores, but it really comes down to terms. I've just hear horror stories about, the payment terms, how much inventory you have to send them, how much margin, what their margin requirements are. And I think we're definitely open to it. It just has to make financial sense.
I mean, the big boxes demand so much that it's really a completely different business model, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, Amazon and Walmart e-commerce, they charge 15%. But, if a big box wants 50%, that's a different story.
Right.
They want to pay you net 90, and it really just comes down to the economics of it.
Yeah. During COVID, as you mentioned, the demand went through the roof. So many companies that were making products that were in high demand got caught in that. What do we do now? Do we ramp up manufacturing for what we know will be a blip here? How do we manage this? How did you manage that? And what were you thinking as you were going through that disproportionate demand for your product?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really find supply chain issues being so much of an issue. The challenge with us, which was an issue for everyone, was getting access to the ocean containers and shipping them across, because the space was so tight. There's so much stuff being shipped, and then the costs, what used to cost $3,000, $3,500 was well over 20,000 per container. And it just, that adds up. And so that was kind of what we were battling. And then, one way that we managed it is we really dropped our advertising, because it's like, there's no point in advertising for stuff that you're not going to have. And then it was really difficult to manage with schools, because schools could come in and buy a few thousand units that if you didn't, have excess inventory, you didn't have enough to fill it, or it would clean you out, and then you'd be out of stock for a month or two. And so, we kind of went through that, where it was really difficult to forecast what the sales were going to be. Meanwhile, there's all these new competitors entering the marketplace. And so it was pretty wild time. But we kind of managed the inventory pretty tight, to not get too heavy, but try and balance that with, having enough to sell, but not having so much that you just have a ton of product that if the sales drop off, you're stuck with all this glut of inventory.
I'm curious, where does the name Oransi come from?
Yeah, so it means orange in Finnish. My grandmother grew up in Finland and was, influential in my life. And, orange is the color of rejuvenation. And I grew up in Syracuse, and everything's orange.
That's right. I love it. Love it. Excellent. So, you often, I'm sure now, as you're part of what you're doing is being on these podcasts like mine, is to share your knowledge, share your experience, especially as it relates to your diagnosis, but even beyond that, your success in business. And I'm sure you get often asked, hey, I have an idea for a product. How do I get started? So when somebody comes with you with that question, where do you guide people when they say, I've got an idea for a product? Where do you tell them to start first?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to understand what the market size is, or the potential market size. I think too many people will like, well, this is $1 billion market, and if I just get 2%, that means it's like it doesn't work that way. You have to really understand, who your customer is, what your unique selling proposition is, why somebody should buy this. Is this solving a problem for anyone? Why should someone buy it? And is there a way to test it? That's kind of like how I got started. I didn't jump to manufacturing thousands of units at a time. I resold other people's stuff to learn the market.
Yeah.
And then once I understood the market, and talked to customers, I knew what they cared about, and then just built that. It wasn't like any kind of rocket science that went into it, but it's just really understanding the marketplace. And the other thing is the market size, I think, is really important. If you're in too small of a market, you could crush it and still like not do great. And so, and I've got some friends that have started businesses, and, they're like really tiny market shares, but they're such big markets that their businesses are pretty solid. And I think it goes to like, what are your expectations, and where do you see yourself, or where do you want to be doing? And is what you're doing aligned with that? Because, not everybody has to have a huge business.
That's right.
And so I think it just needs to align with, what do you want to get out of it? Where do you want to be in X years? And then work backwards from there.
Yeah, that also ties to, I'm sure, if you're in partnership, making sure that at least at the start you're in alignment on what that means. What is it that we're looking to build here together? How big of a business is it that we want? In your experience, what holds people back? A lot of people have ideas, lots of ideas. I've got an idea. But what do you think, in your observation, holds people back from actually jumping in and doing it? You mentioned early on, there was confidence was an issue for you, as it is for most people. What else do you observe, do you think, holds people back?
Yeah, I mean, definitely confidence for me. I think that's a lot of it. Sometimes it's, you need cash to get something going. You don't have the funds to do it. And so you have to solve for that. I think, you have to be able to execute, and you have to understand all the different pieces, and understand your strengths and weaknesses, and not be so, I guess, high ego to where you think you know everything when, you don't know what you don't know. And, kind of do your homework and understand what you're getting into, or talk with other people that have done something similar. I think, surrounding yourself with really good people, or connecting with people, like even on LinkedIn, and ask questions, and get educated on, what it takes, and what you're missing.
That's a big part of it. And as you were saying that, it reminds me back to early lessons that you had to develop in the military to get people to work together, to listen to people, to get the most out of individuals that you did have on your team at that point in time. I got to figure that comes into play sometimes as well.
Yeah, and I think, we all have our own experience, and we view things through our lived experience. And, to me, what's always been interesting is like, what am I missing, or what don't I know, that I need to know? It's interesting for me when I work, with engineers, and they're really good at engineering, but there's blind spots to, like, marketing.
Yeah.
Or marketing people don't understand, like, what the engineers are doing. And it's kind of like you get so entranced in your area of expertise that you, in some cases, discount the value of other parts of of an organization, without fully, and I think that's natural, that, everyone does that. But I think you need to kind of, step back, and just kind of take the approach of, I don't know, like, what these guys are doing, what they're, the importance of that, and just kind of, get educated on that, full, all the parts for, what it takes to grow a business.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Peter, what's next that you can share with us for Oransi? What's on the horizon? Where are you going next with the business?
Yeah, so this summer we're launching our first product that we're, making in Virginia. And then probably over the next year, we'll introduce a couple other air purifiers. And then beyond that, I see us moving into some other product categories, although we haven't figured out what those are yet. But, theoretically, we can make anything with an electric motor, and then ship it direct to the end user. And so, I think we're looking at, what industry can we be disruptive in, with our pricing model, because we've figured out how to design products, similar costs, to what they do in China, but make it here. And so I really like our story. 70 to 80% of Americans prefer American-made products, but very few people want to pay a premium, and we've solved for that. And so, we don't know what we want to be when we grow up, but we're kind of in the process of reviewing, what that is.
And now you've got this long list of loyal fans that are using one of your products. You sold to them directly, so you own that relationship. A tremendous opportunity to potentially explore complementary products that they might want from you as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can leverage, I don't know, we've 100,000 customers, and we can leverage that to, launch new products. We're also, doing more on Amazon, which they own the customer, which, it's kind of, I guess, part of the deal.
Right. Yeah.
But they're just a monster of a marketplace. And so, I think, almost everybody's there. And so, we'll see how that goes. But ideally, we sell direct, and, just, ship everything from here.
Yeah. All right. Where do we go online to find out more about the business?
Yeah, our website is oransi.com, ORANSI.com. And I'm on LinkedIn, Peter Mann, MANN. I'm really happy to connect with anyone, talk about business or reshoring or autism, any of that stuff. Sure.
And Peter, I'm always looking for a book recommendation. Is there a book that comes to mind that you would recommend?
Yeah, I like This Is Marketing by Seth Godin. It's kind of the approach that we've taken, and that is to build marketing into your product. I've seen in 20 years of doing this that, you can take an average product, even one that's really low cost, but to sell it, if you have to spend a ton of money in advertising, it's never going to make sense. And so it makes a lot more sense to build marketing into your product and drive word of mouth and awareness, because word of mouth is 10 times more effective than any other form of marketing.
Yeah, agreed. That's one of my favorite marketing books. I have it on my shelf. I'm looking at it right now. It's kind of like the summary of all my other marketing books. You could just read this one book and you'll be on your path, I think, on marketing. But it's somewhat, to extend to us, counterintuitive, right? That's why I think it's a challenge for some people. Because we often might, if we don't put enough into, or we're reselling a product that really doesn't have the quality that doesn't sell itself, then we have to layer it with more marketing, don't we?
Yeah. And the math just doesn't work. It's, especially with, Amazon, if you have a physical product, they're encouraging Chinese factories to sell direct on their platform. So how are you going to compete with them?
Right. You're not.
You have to build something that's better or connects with people better, or something remarkable that they would want to talk about.
Yeah. Excellent. All right, let's wrap it up. Last question for you. What's one thing you want us to take away from this conversation? We've had pretty far-reaching conversation, from your journey to the autism diagnosis to building a couple of different companies. What's one thing you want us to remember from this conversation?
I mean, for me, like, I never would have predicted I am where, I am. If you went back to my childhood or high school or college, it's like, I mean, it makes sense going backwards, but, I had really low expectations. And, I think that was in part to being autistic and not being understood. I think for anyone, it really helps to have self-awareness and understand your strengths and weaknesses and play to your strengths, and don't be beaten down by your weaknesses. Because, I think in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of training on, like, well, you need to get good at your weaknesses. and I think now it's fortunately not so much that way. And, and I think it's getting clear on your strengths and just doing that. And I think you'll be much better off than dwelling on areas that don't naturally, that you're not naturally gifted at.
And that those areas, I think what's so inspirational here is that those other areas, those superpowers that you do have, or you start to channel them into superpowers, can result in you being a successful entrepreneur, a successful business owner. In other words, the societally accepted norms of what is normal, what is intelligence, do not necessarily equate to a successful business owner. And the reverse is true. In other words, so many people I talk to say, well, I never thought I would be a business owner because I was never smart enough, or I never was good at business, or I never was good at math. And so we allow society to kind of put those barriers on us as to what we might or may not be able to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know if you follow Simon Sinek, but he talks a lot about infinite versus finite games. And I think that, school is a finite game where, it's known rules, you study the test, you take the test, but when you get out into the business world, it's an infinite game. It's like the rules change, the players change, and you have to be able to figure things out. And it's, in some ways, it's the A students that have never struggled, that when they get out into the real world and kind of come across they're playing a different game and they've never had to persevere, they sometimes don't do as well as,
that's right,
some of the B or C students that have, kind of struggled and have resilience. And, for me, it's like, I'm finally playing the game that, I'm wired for. Whereas in school, that was not really the case.
Well said. Well said. Tell us again where you want us to go online to learn more about Oransi.
Yeah, Oransi.com, ORANSI.com. That's it.
Excellent. We'll have a link to that as well on the show notes page. Peter, thanks for joining me and for this great conversation and being transparent with all of this and sharing all of your knowledge and experience. Thanks for being with me today.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it.
This is Henry Lopez, and thanks for joining me on this episode of The How of Business. My guest today again was Peter Mann. I release new episodes every Monday morning, and you can listen and subscribe to my show anywhere you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at my website, thehowofbusiness.com. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to The How of Business. For more information about our coaching programs, online courses, show notes pages, links, and other resources, please visit thehowofbusiness.com.